He thought it was just a flat tire, until a quiet boy with his eyes and a familiar silver bracelet changed everything he believed about the past he left behind. Ryan Caldwell had never planned to stop that day. His schedule was tight, like always, calls, meetings, decisions that moved millions. He was driving back from a site inspection just outside the city, speeding down a quiet rural highway in his luxury black SUV, when the car began to pull unevenly. A moment later, the dashboard lit up. Flat tire. He muttered under his breath, pulled over, and stepped out of the vehicle with the frustrated detachment of a man who believed problems like this were beneath him. The sun beat down on his navy blue suit, and dust settled on his polished shoes as he popped the trunk and surveyed the tools. He hadn't changed a tire in over a decade. He was bending over when a voice came from behind him, small, clear, and unafraid. "Need help?" Ryan straightened and turned. Standing a few feet away was a boy no older than 7 or 8, with tousled dark hair and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He wore a slightly stained white t-shirt, faded jeans, and worn sneakers. His posture was confident, almost matter-of-fact, like helping a stranger fix a tire was just another part of his day. Ryan was about to dismiss him with a polite nod when his eyes landed on something unexpected. On the boy's wrist was a thin silver bracelet, dull with time but unmistakably familiar. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. He stepped closer, almost unconsciously, trying to get a better look. The bracelet looked exactly like the one he had given Haley 6 years ago. It had been custom-made, engraved with 2 words, "Stay brave." At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, just a gift before he left for the city to expand his business. She had cried when he gave it to her, and he had smiled, thinking they'd pick up where they left off when he came back. He never came back. The boy noticed Ryan staring. "My mom gave it to me," he said simply. "She said it was important to her." Ryan looked down at him again, really looked. The boy's hair was the same shade of deep brown as his own. His nose, his chin, even the way his eyes narrowed in curiosity, it was all familiar. And then there were the eyes. Bright blue. Not sky blue. Not gray. The exact piercing blue that stared back at Ryan in the mirror every morning. His stomach twisted. The boy wasn't just some kid offering help. Something about him felt too connected, too close, like looking into a past that had circled back and punched a hole through his present. He suddenly forgot about the flat tire, about the calls he was missing, about the meeting that would now be rescheduled. "What's your name?" Ryan asked, his voice lower, slower. "Evan," the boy replied, brushing his hands against his jeans. "What's yours?" Ryan stared at him for another long moment. Then, with a strange edge of something like awe or disbelief, he said, "Ryan." Evan didn't react. He just nodded. "Okay. Can I help with the tire now?" Ryan could only nod. And as Evan knelt down next to the wheel, Ryan stood above him in a daze, heart pounding, trying to understand what kind of moment he had just stepped into. All he knew was that nothing in his carefully controlled life would ever be the same again. Ryan stood beside the SUV, watching as the boy knelt confidently by the tire and began inspecting the lug nuts with a seriousness that didn't match his age. Evan's hands were small but steady, and his focus was complete, as if this wasn't the first time he'd helped someone stranded on the side of the road. Ryan didn't know whether to speak, to kneel beside him, or to walk away and gather his thoughts. His instincts were all off. In business, he was decisive, sharp, always 5 moves ahead. But right now, every plan he'd ever known was crumbling under the weight of a bracelet and a child's familiar face. He crouched slowly, trying to keep his voice level. "You've done this before?" Evan nodded without looking up. "Yeah. My mom's car gets old sometimes. We don't always have money for help, so she showed me how." There was no trace of embarrassment in his voice, no hesitation, just the simple reality of a life Ryan had never imagined for Haley. He had left her with promises and ambition, telling himself he'd come back once everything was stable, once the company was launched, once his success had a name. But then came the delays, the pressure, and the silent choice to not look back. Now, looking at Evan, he realized how much had happened while he was building his empire. He hesitated before asking the next question. "What's your mom's name?" Evan looked up briefly, his blue eyes catching the light in a way that made Ryan's chest tighten. Haley. Haley Rivers. The name hit him like a punch. She hadn't changed her name. She hadn't married. Something about that made it worse. It meant she had stayed still while he kept moving forward, without ever turning around. Ryan stood up abruptly, pacing a few steps away, suddenly needing air even though they were outside. He turned back after a moment. "How old are you, Evan?" "7, the boy replied, tightening a bolt with a grunt. "Almost 8. 7. Ryan did the math. It lined up. The year he left, the silence, the distance, he had thought she was angry. That maybe she was better off without him. But she had been pregnant. She had been carrying his child, and he had never known. Or worse, never made himself available to know. He looked down at the small, determined boy crouched beside his car, and a swell of regret unlike anything he had ever felt rose in his throat. Evan finished and stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans again. "It's done. You're good to go." Ryan couldn't speak. He reached into his wallet automatically, pulling out a bill without thinking, but the boy shook his head. "I don't want money. I was just helping." That answer, so clear and humble, only twisted the knife deeper. He shoved the bill back into his pocket. "Do you and your mom live around here?" Evan nodded and pointed up the road. "That yellow house with the red porch. We just got it fixed last year." Ryan followed the direction with his eyes. It wasn't far. He could walk there in less than 5 minutes. He imagined Haley inside, maybe cleaning, maybe cooking dinner, completely unaware of the storm that was about to walk back into her life. "Would it be okay if I came by to say thank you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Evan tilted his head, clearly thinking it over like a miniature adult. "I think she'd want that. She talks about you sometimes." That stopped Ryan cold. "She does?" Evan nodded. "Only a little. She said you were smart. And busy. And not very good at calling people back." Ryan laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Only shame." "That sounds about right." Evan shrugged. "She says we don't need a lot. Just enough. But I think she misses someone. Maybe you." Ryan looked at him again, really looked, and realized that the boy hadn't just changed a tire. He had cracked something open inside him that Ryan didn't know he still had. The cold layers of years gone by, of choices made too easily, of love abandoned for ambition, were starting to peel back. And as Evan ran up the road, disappearing toward the yellow house, Ryan stayed where he was, surrounded by silence, heart pounding, unable to ignore the truth anymore. He had a son. And a second chance. And he wasn't sure he deserved either. But he was going to find out. Ryan didn't drive away. For several minutes after Evan had jogged off toward the house with the red porch, he stood beside his SUV with the repaired tire, hands resting on his hips, heart pounding beneath his crisp shirt. The wind carried the scent of distant pine trees and sun-warmed pavement, but he barely noticed it. All he could see in his mind was that silver bracelet and the child's eyes that mirrored his own. It had taken less than 30 minutes for his entire past to rise from where he'd buried it and plant itself firmly in front of him, alive, talking, helping him with a tire like it was the most natural thing in the world. He got in the car not to leave, but to collect himself. He didn't start the engine. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, emails, missed calls, his assistant's concerned messages about the delay, but none of it mattered. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't feel the pull of the office, the pressure of the market, or the need to be anywhere but exactly where he was. Still, he hesitated. What was he going to say to her? How do you knock on the door of a woman you abandoned and tell her you just met your son on the side of the road? After 15 more minutes of indecision, he finally stepped out, locked the car, and walked slowly toward the house. With each step, memories returned, softer ones, things he hadn't allowed himself to revisit. The first time Haley made him laugh until he cried. The way she used to sit cross-legged on her couch in oversized sweatpants, humming to herself while doing a crossword. The night he gave her the bracelet, telling her it was a reminder to stay strong while he was gone. He hadn't known he would stay gone for good. The house looked worn but cared for. The paint on the porch was chipped in places, but the flowers along the fence were in full bloom. A wind chime tinkled gently above the doorway. He hesitated at the steps. Inside that house was the woman who had once trusted him completely, and the child he had never known he had. His hand hovered near the doorbell, and then finally, he pressed it. The sound echoed inside. A moment passed. Then another. He heard footsteps, light and steady. When the door opened, Haley stood there. For a second, neither of them spoke. She looked different, but not in the way time wears a person down. Her features were the same, delicate but strong, and her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail. Her eyes, though, had changed. They were still the warm hazel he remembered, but now guarded, sharpened with experience and a tired kind of wisdom. She wore a faded t-shirt, jeans, and no makeup. She looked beautiful. "Ryan," she said, voice neutral. He opened his mouth but nothing came out. He had imagined this moment in so many ways on the walk over, and yet now that it was real, he found himself unprepared. I didn't know," he said finally. "I swear I didn't know." She folded her arms. "Didn't know what? That I was raising your son alone? That I wore that bracelet for a year after you left, waiting for a call?" Her words weren't angry, but they carried the weight of disappointment layered over pain. Ryan stepped forward slightly. "Haley, I thought you were done with me. I figured I had missed my chance." "You didn't just miss it," she said, her tone quiet. "You erased it. I thought if I left, it would be easier for both of us. That you'd move on. That I wasn't good for you," he said, realizing how hollow it sounded even as he said it. She looked at him, really looked, as if trying to find the truth behind the voice she used to love. "And did you move on, Ryan?" He couldn't lie. "No. Not really." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of distant birds and the creak of the porch railing in the breeze. Finally, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "But only because Evan will want to know if you really showed up." He nodded and stepped inside, not knowing if this was the start of redemption or something even more complicated. But he knew one thing with complete certainty. He wasn't walking away again. The moment Ryan stepped into the house, he was hit by an overwhelming wave of familiarity and strangeness all at once. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, like cinnamon or warm oatmeal. The walls were lined with modest framed photos, drawings in bright crayon colors, and handmade crafts that could only have come from a child's imagination. There was a warmth here that no penthouse apartment or luxury suite he had ever lived in could replicate. It was a home, not polished, not perfect, but alive. He took a slow breath, letting it settle into his chest, and followed Haley into the small living room. She didn't offer coffee or tea, didn't try to make conversation. She simply sat on the arm of the couch, watching him, waiting. Ryan stood in the center of the room, taking in everything. His eyes landed on a photo perched above the fireplace, a snapshot of Evan grinning with a missing tooth, holding what looked like a hand-painted birdhouse. Next to him in the photo was Haley, smiling without makeup, her hair in a messy bun, her eyes tired but happy. There was no man in the picture. No father figure. Just the two of them, a team. "I can't believe how much he looks like me," Ryan said softly, still staring at the photo. "But he's got your heart." He didn't hesitate to help a stranger. Haley gave a short breath of laughter that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's a good kid." He had to be. He turned to face her. "You should have told me." "I did try," she replied, her voice even. "Once. I called your office when I found out. I left messages. I sent one letter. I never heard back. After that, I stopped trying to make excuses for you." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, guilt tightening around his ribs. He remembered that time. It had been chaos, new investors, long hours, a constant fear that everything he was building would collapse. But what haunted him now wasn't just that he'd missed her calls. It was that he hadn't made himself available to receive them at all. He had left without looking back, without leaving a door open. "I didn't know," he said again, not as an excuse this time, but as a confession. Haley leaned back, arms still crossed. "You didn't want to know." The words were sharp but not unfair. And they cut deep. At that moment, Evan came running into the room, his face lighting up when he saw Ryan. He held a small action figure in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. "You stayed," Evan said with a grin, as if surprised by his own happiness. "I told you I would," Ryan replied, kneeling down to meet him at eye level. "Wanna see my room?" Evan asked eagerly. "I've got space stuff and a rocket lamp." Ryan glanced up at Haley, unsure if she would allow it. She gave a quiet nod. Evan led him down the hall into a room that was small but full of energy, walls painted with stars, model rockets hanging from the ceiling, books stacked beside the bed. Ryan looked around, his chest tight with a blend of awe and heartbreak. He had missed all of this, the first steps, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the quiet triumphs of a little boy discovering the world. "This one's my favorite," Evan said, holding up a drawing of a space shuttle with the word Explorer scrawled underneath in shaky handwriting. "Because it's brave." Ryan stared at the picture, barely able to respond. "You are brave, Evan." The boy looked at him curiously. "My mom says that too. She says being brave means doing what's right, even when it's scary." Ryan nodded, unable to speak for a second. "She's right." They spent a few more minutes in the room, and when Evan finally returned to his coloring book, Ryan stepped out quietly, meeting Haley again in the hallway. Her arms were no longer crossed, but her posture was still cautious. "I know I can't undo anything," he said quietly. "But I want to be part of his life. I want to be there now, however you'll let me." Haley studied him for a long moment. "It's not just about showing up once, Ryan. He's not a meeting you attend and check off your list. He's a person. He'll get attached. He'll believe in you. If you disappear again." "I won't," he said before she could finish. "I swear." She sighed and finally nodded. "Okay. You can start by picking him up from school tomorrow." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. A door cracked open. A second chance in motion. And this time, he was ready to walk through it. The next morning, Ryan stood outside the school 20 minutes earlier than necessary, leaning against his car and watching children stream in and out of the gates. It was a modest public school, surrounded by trimmed hedges and a faded mural on the brick wall that read, "Dream Big." He had never in his life picked up a child from school, let alone waited with anticipation and nerves twisting in his stomach. Business meetings had never made him this uneasy. But this was different. This wasn't about closing a deal or being impressive. This was about showing up, something he had never done when it mattered most. Now, he was determined to start changing that. He had barely slept the night before. He kept replaying every word from Haley, every look, every moment in Evan's room. He thought about the handmade space drawings and the rocket lamp and the way Evan said the word brave like it carried weight. And more than anything, he thought about the moment Haley had said, "Start by picking him up." It wasn't a grand gesture, but to him, it was a bridge. A fragile one. One he didn't dare take for granted. When the bell rang, a flood of students poured out of the building, chattering and running toward parents, older siblings, and school buses. Ryan stood straighter, eyes scanning the crowd until he spotted Evan in the middle of the chaos. The boy's backpack was slightly crooked, and his shoelaces were untied. He looked around, searching, until his gaze landed on Ryan. His face lit up, not in shock, but in confirmation. As if he had expected him to be there all along. "You came," Evan said, walking up quickly, his voice casual but his smile wide. "I told you I would," Ryan said, opening the passenger door for him. "I thought maybe you'd forget," Evan added, climbing in and buckling his seatbelt with exaggerated effort. Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced over. "I used to forget things," he said carefully. "Important things. But not anymore. Not you." They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Evan munching on crackers Ryan had thought to bring, the radio playing softly in the background. Eventually, Evan started talking, about school, about how they were learning to add numbers with pictures of apples, about a kid named Drew who got in trouble for hiding glue sticks in his desk. Ryan listened closely, nodding, reacting, asking questions. Every word felt like a gift, a door opening a little more. When they got back to the house, Haley was on the porch watering a few potted plants. She looked up when the car pulled in and watched them for a second before walking down the steps. Evan jumped out and ran to her, lifting his backpack like it held treasure. "Mom, look! He really came. And he brought snacks. Not the healthy kind either." Ryan stepped out more slowly, unsure of how welcome he was in this moment. But Haley gave him a nod, quiet, cautious approval, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, while Evan played with building blocks in the living room, Ryan found himself in the kitchen helping Haley with dinner. She handed him vegetables to chop and didn't correct his technique even when it was clear he didn't know what he was doing. The silence between them was lighter than before, almost companionable. "You're good with him," she said without looking up. "I don't know what I'm doing," Ryan admitted. "I'm just trying not to mess it up." She wiped her hands on a towel and leaned back against the counter. "Kids don't need perfect. They need present. You showed up today. That matters." He looked at her, eyes steady. "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't respond with words, but he saw the faintest shift in her expression, less guarded, a little more open. It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it was trust, beginning to grow like something planted long ago that had finally started pushing through the surface. That night, after dinner and after Evan had fallen asleep on the couch with a toy spaceship clutched in one hand, Ryan stood by the doorway, preparing to leave. Haley walked him out, arms crossed loosely, sweater pulled tight against the cool air. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded. "Same time." And just before he turned away, she added softly, "Thank you." Ryan walked to his car feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not victory. But connection. Real, messy, unfinished, but real. And he knew one thing with absolute certainty: this was the most important thing he had ever tried to build. Over the next few weeks, Ryan settled into a rhythm that was completely foreign to the life he used to live. He started waking up early not to check the stock market or review investor reports but to pack snacks for Evan and rehearse bedtime stories in his head. He began organizing his business calls around school pickups and learned the exact temperature Evan liked his hot chocolate. It was awkward at first. He didn't know which games Evan liked most, or how to comfort him when he scraped his knee on the sidewalk, but he was learning, slowly, quietly, with a kind of determination he'd never felt for anything else. The walls in Haley's home began to shift. At first, Ryan was a guest, someone who stood just inside the door, unsure of how far he was allowed to step. But as the days passed, he found himself helping Evan with homework at the kitchen table, listening to the same math songs over and over, and folding laundry on the couch while Haley washed dishes. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but there was an ease building between them, unspoken but undeniable. One Thursday evening, after Evan had fallen asleep early with a crayon still in his hand, Haley and Ryan sat on the front steps with mugs of tea, watching the wind stir the leaves in the yard. The street was quiet, the porch light casting a soft glow over their shoulders. Ryan hadn't planned on staying that long, but every time he thought of leaving, Evan had begged him to stay just a little bit longer, and Haley hadn't said no. Haley sipped her tea and spoke without turning to him. "He asks questions at night when you leave. Like where you go. If you're still going to be here tomorrow." Ryan looked at the stars above, the sharp ache of guilt resting in his chest. "I don't blame him. He doesn't have any reason to believe I'll keep showing up." "He wants to," she said. "He wants to believe in you. And he wants me to believe in you too." Ryan turned to look at her, studying the calm strength in her expression. "Do you?" he asked, not pressing, just asking. Haley took a long breath. "I want to. And that's not something I thought I'd say when I saw you on my doorstep." He gave a quiet laugh, more out of surprise than amusement. "You had every right to slam the door." She finally looked at him. "But I didn't." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, "You've changed. You're not the same man who left." Ryan nodded slowly. That man didn't understand what he had. He thought ambition meant cutting everything else out. "I've spent years being successful and alone. I didn't know what I was missing until Evan stood on the side of the road with a wrench in his hand." Haley smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." Ryan set down his mug and leaned forward slightly. "I don't want to just visit his life, Haley. I want to be in it. And not just for Evan. I want to rebuild what I destroyed. If it's too late, I understand. But I'm here because I mean it." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know what this is yet. But I know what it's not. It's not temporary anymore. I've seen you stay. So has he." A breeze rustled through the trees, and for the first time in years, Ryan felt something inside him settle. Not with finality, not with full resolution, but with the quiet hope that he had found his way back to something that had once been real. And now, slowly, it could be real again. Saturday mornings had always been background noise in Ryan's old life, just another day to catch up on reports, respond to international emails, and prepare for Monday. But this Saturday was different. He found himself sitting cross-legged on the carpet of Haley's living room, surrounded by Lego bricks, coloring pages, and the happy hum of Evan narrating a made-up adventure involving a spaceship, a flying sandwich, and a villain named Mr. Socks. Ryan had never built a Lego rocket before. He had never sat on a living room floor for more than 10 minutes without checking his phone. But now he was here, fully present, watching his son light up over every imaginary turn of the story. Evan handed him a bright blue block and said, very seriously, "You have to put this on top, or the whole thing will explode. Trust me, I tested it." Ryan followed his instructions without question, his smile easy and unguarded. He didn't even realize how natural it had become to follow his son's lead, to let go of control, and to simply be someone Evan could count on. Haley watched them from the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee, the other tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She had seen pieces of this new Ryan over the last few weeks, in the way he remembered Evan's favorite snacks, in how he tied his shoes the exact way Evan liked, double-looped and a little loose. But today, watching them laugh on the floor, something inside her softened. She wasn't waiting for him to mess up anymore. She was watching to see if he would stay steady, and he had. Later that day, Evan invited Ryan to see the old oak tree behind the house, the one where he'd built a secret spy base, using branches and rope. Ryan followed him across the backyard, stepping over fallen leaves and the remnants of summer chalk drawings faded on the pavement. When they reached the tree, Evan turned to him, serious again in that way only children could be. "Do you think you're gonna stay forever?" Evan asked. Ryan knelt down to meet him eye to eye. "I want to," he said. "If you and your mom want me to." Evan looked thoughtful, then nodded slowly. "Mom says people leave sometimes. But I think you're trying not to." "I am," Ryan said. "More than anything." Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of string with 3 plastic beads tied in the middle, blue, green, and gold. "It's a lucky charm," he explained. "I made it at school. I was gonna give it to Mom, but maybe you should have it. You need the luck." Ryan accepted it like it was made of gold. "I think this might be the most important thing anyone's ever given me." When they returned to the house, Haley was in the doorway, arms crossed lightly, watching them. She noticed the string in Ryan's hand, the way Evan reached for his fingers without thinking. There was something so normal in it, something so right, that she couldn't push it away. That evening, after Evan fell asleep halfway through a bedtime story Ryan had been reading, Haley walked into the living room while Ryan quietly pulled the blanket over his son. She waited until he stood up and followed her to the kitchen, where she opened a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. "I was going to mail this to you once," she said, handing it to him. "But I didn't." Inside was a photo of Evan as a baby, barely a few months old, wrapped in a soft blanket with his blue eyes wide open. Ryan's breath caught. He ran his fingers gently over the edges of the photo, as if afraid it might disappear. "Why are you giving me this now?" he asked. "Because I think you're ready to understand what you missed," Haley said. "And because I don't want you to miss what's still ahead." There were no speeches, no declarations of forgiveness. But in that moment, a door opened wider than ever before, not just to Evan, but to the pieces of a life Ryan never thought he'd be allowed to reclaim. And this time, he didn't need to be asked to stay. He already knew he would. Sunday came with golden light filtering through the curtains and the smell of pancakes drifting through the house. Ryan stood at the stove, wearing an apron that said, "Chef in Training," in bold lettering, a gift Evan had insisted on giving him just a few days earlier. The batter was a little too thick, and the first few pancakes came out lopsided, but Evan declared them the best ever, with syrup dripping off his chin and a thumbs up that made Ryan feel like he had just won a prize more valuable than any contract he'd ever signed. Haley was sipping her coffee at the table, barefoot, hair still slightly messy from sleep, watching them with a softness that hadn't been there weeks ago. She didn't try to take over the cooking or correct him. She simply let the moment unfold, and that, more than anything, told Ryan they had turned a corner. After breakfast, they all walked to the park. Evan rode his small bike ahead of them, shouting occasional updates about imaginary obstacles on the sidewalk and pretending he was a space explorer on a secret mission. Haley and Ryan followed behind at a slower pace, walking side by side in a silence that didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Comfortable. Ryan had never walked like this before, with no agenda, no need to impress or prove anything. Just the steady rhythm of one step after another, the sound of laughter in the air, and Haley's shoulder occasionally brushing his when their arms swayed too close. At the park, Evan ran to the swings, his energy endless, and Ryan pushed him higher and higher while Haley sat on a nearby bench, smiling to herself as she watched them. After a while, Evan jumped off the swing mid-air and landed with a dramatic superhero pose, brushing imaginary dirt off his knees. "Did I fly?" he asked, breathless. "You flew," Ryan said. "Higher than I ever did." When they got home that afternoon, Ryan helped Evan with a craft project for school, a poster about families. Evan insisted on including photos, so they printed a few using Haley's old printer. One was of the three of them at the park, another of Evan in his space-themed pajamas with Ryan beside him reading a bedtime story. The last one was the baby photo Haley had given Ryan the night before. Evan looked at it, eyes wide with recognition and curiosity. "Was that me?" he asked. Haley nodded. "That was you, not long after you were born." "Was Dad there?" Evan looked between them. Ryan's heart squeezed, but he met his son's eyes. "I wasn't, buddy. But I should have been. I didn't know then. But now I do. And I'm here now. Every day." Evan nodded slowly and added a heart sticker next to the baby photo. "Then it's okay." That evening, while Evan slept with his arms around his stuffed rocket and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floor, Haley walked Ryan to the door. But this time, she didn't just stand at the threshold. She leaned against the frame, watching him with something different in her expression, something settled, something real. "You've kept your word," she said. "You didn't disappear." "I won't," he said. "Not ever again." Haley stepped forward, closed the small distance between them, and for the first time in years, reached for his hand. She didn't say anything else, and she didn't have to. The gesture said everything. Ryan squeezed her hand gently, and they stood there, not as broken people trying to rewrite the past, but as two people willing to write the future together. Not perfect. Not rushed. Just honest. In that moment, under the quiet porch light with the scent of spring in the air and the echo of Evan's laughter still in their minds, Ryan knew he had finally built something that mattered. Something real. Something worth everything he had once thought he needed to chase. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. From an author's perspective, the ending of this story isn't just happy, it's deeply earned. It doesn't offer a fairy tale resolution or instant harmony, as fictional narratives often do. Instead, it shows a journey, a slow, awkward, but sincere process of returning. Ryan isn't a hero by nature, he's a man who made mistakes, and that's exactly what makes his path meaningful. He didn't get a second chance, he earned it through presence, patience, and honesty. What stands out most is that the ending leaves space to breathe. There are no dramatic declarations, no idealized moments. There's a quiet touch, a simple, "you stayed," and that's enough. Because real love isn't found in words, it's proven through action. And the story's final note reflects that, it's not about reclaiming the past, but about becoming worthy of the present.